Okay, I'm Jeannine Brown. Well, I first came as a student to the seminary. I had been a part of University Christian Fellowship, part-time on staff, kind of feeling that out, seeing if that was something God was leading me to do full-time and long-term. And I liked it, and I felt like I needed more training. And I was encouraged by my area director in the Milwaukee area to consider seminary. He was starting at Trinity and loving his experience. And I knew there was Bethel in Minnesota. I had some friends that were at Bethel. A good friend of mine, her husband was a MDiv student at Bethel at the time. And so I decided I would come back toward where I'm from and live at home, save money, go to seminary here. So that brought me to seminary. I was new to seminary world. I didn't really know what seminaries were fully. And I was new to Bethel. I'd never been on Bethel's campus prior to driving in for an orientation. I think that was my first time. It would have been in '87. Robert Stein was a New Testament professor at the seminary. He taught at the college for a while as well. But when I came, he was at the seminary. And he was my advisor. And in those days, they were trying to figure out how to move from a residential campus to really a commuter campus. Most people just drove in. And so they didn't come to the once a month, meet your advisor prayer time. So it would be me and Dr. Stein. And so he got to know me, and he got to know my work. I was in a course with him, Biblical Prolegomena, in the fall of 1987. And he asked me at some point in that term to be his TA. And I really did one of these things. Like, I really didn't think I was going to come into seminary and start doing other things besides just learning. And but he really encouraged me, and he encouraged me to consider doctoral work. I taught beginning Greek the summer of 1989, which was something his first TA did. I was his second TA for a while, and then I graduated to his first TA when Dan graduated, and taught 8 weeks beginning summer Greek, because they assumed young men would come from undergraduate to seminary with a Greek program, that beginning Greek in hand, and that wasn't happening. So this was sort of the remedial, you have to learn Greek to take the Greek exam. And I loved teaching Greek. And Bob gave me lots of opportunities to fill in when he was gone, teach a Greek seminar, 1 credit kind of thing in the winter. And I love teaching, but it was a real hurdle for me with my background and women don't teach men, kind of narrative and assumption, to kind of make that jump. Even to teach summer Greek, I did a lot of soul searching. I say it's the only time I fasted in my entire life. Not because I was trying to be spiritual, I just couldn't eat for like 2 weeks trying to make this decision. I was praying a lot. So I was praying and fasting, but I just wasn't sure even then. But I said yes, and the confirmation was in the experience, and that I helped these students learn Greek. My husband was in that class. We had never met before. We met on the first day of class. He says that he had to go to extreme lengths to get a good grade, but that was not. We didn't date until after the class was over. But so that's part of our story. So yeah, that was really formative. Changed direction. I remember asking Dr. Stein. I have a hard time calling him Bob, but he was saying you should think about doctoral work, and here are some pathways. And he had gone to Princeton. I think he was wanting me to go that direction. And I said, I just don't think I'm geared toward writing. He was just in a huge part of his writing career, writing second editions and method and message of Jesus' teachings. It's not a big problem. And I was helping him do research, and I loved it. I just thought, I can't do what he's doing. And he was so wise. He said, well, maybe just do your doctoral work so you can teach, because you love teaching, right? I said, yeah. And he said, well, the other might come. And just such an amazing mentor to me. I really do feel that. And I didn't have opportunity for a lot of female mentors in my discipline. I didn't have any until doctoral work, because it was just men at Bethel, other than Jeanette Baki, who taught Christian education. But and I had her for a class, kind of an upper level class, but she was doing different kinds of things than me in her guild and her profession. So he was just an amazing mentor to me.
So you did come back to teach at Bethel Seminary.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, I kept in touch with Bethel. My husband was a pastor in the BGC, and we did sort of pastoring together without me being actually officially pastoring at all. And in 1994, It was after Leland Eliason had come. He started an alumni council for the seminary, and he invited me to be a part of it. So that was sort of my first reconnecting with Bethel. So I was part of the alumni council for a couple years. And then, I visited Dr. Stein, and he's like, would you ever want to co-teach with me biblical prolegomena? I'm like, sure, why not? So that was 1995. He was, I think, already maybe moving towards Southern in terms of knowing kind of what was his trajectory. But we co-taught. He kind of gifted me with the course. So I started teaching what became hermeneutics a lot in the late 90s. Started thinking about PhD work. 1996, I started at Luther Seminary in the cities here at a 2- and 4-year-old at the time, Kate and Libby. And my husband was, by that time, a school teacher. So just kept on doing I did the schoolwork, doctoral work, and taught, kind of just back and forth. And they really did help each other out, that kind of experience. And I remember having I don't know when it was, maybe 1998, had a lunch with Leland, who I just knew just a little bit from Alumni Council, and then David Clark, who had been a professor of mine and was now leading the Center for Biblical and Theological Foundations, I believe at that time, and lunch to talk about my interest in teaching at the seminary. So they were thinking of me doing that. They were preparing me, giving me teaching experience, kind of moving me to an adjunct role that was more, I went to some of the faculty meetings, and not the faculty, but the small groups of faculty, the discipline-specific faculty meetings. So they were just wanting that to be the case. So in 2000, when I had just finished taking my comps, I hadn't even got my thesis proposal, I think, reviewed and approved yet. I was asked to interview for a New Testament position. Jim Brooks had just retired, was just retiring, and they decided not to do a national search. They were just going to bring me through the process, but I had to do the search committee, I had to do the full faculty committee, I had to do all of the hoops, but with no sort of competition involved. And it was sooner than I had wanted, just because my younger daughter was still going to be in kindergarten next year, and I wanted to do my dissertation, without necessarily full-time teaching. But it seemed like the right opportunity at the right time, and I'd always wanted to return to Bethel. So I made it through all the hoops and started in 2000 full-time. And David Clark, my center dean, was very wonderful and gave me 7 sections of hermeneutics, which I had taught about 18 times up to that point. I didn't have to redo anything. And then one Gospels course, which I had taught a couple times. So I had no new preps my first year. And I just finished my dissertation. And so that's how I came to Bethel second time. I do want to mention that I was an adjunct at the college for Intro to the Bible in 1995-96. At the same time as I was teaching for the first time with Bob at the seminary. So that was an early touch point with the college. Otherwise, I've been at the seminary the whole time, and I was an associate dean for a couple years. I did some special projects, including a self-study chair. I moved into a interim dean capacity in 11-12 when Dave Ritter left. And then I moved into an interim VP dean capacity with Justin Irving in 17-18, I think, after David Clark retired. So I'm currently online program director. I was transregional course coordinator, whatever title. I had different kinds of roles. I've always done some admin because I like to do that, and I'm pretty good at it. So that's always been kind of a companion piece to what I've done. And those times in the dean role, interim dean, I've thought seriously in both cases about continuing, and very intentionally chose not to. I went to San Diego. We moved out there in 2014 and came back in December of 2019 after the closure of the campus there. And we went out there in part because we wanted a little adventure and change. Our kids were in college, and thought about it. We wanted to relocate there, and actually wanted them to come out too, kind of eventually. And that whole family trajectory didn't go that direction, so we're all back here now. But it was a wonderful campus. I had always enjoyed the seminary faculty there. Mark Strauss, Glenn Sogorgi, Jim Smith, just Nora Cottle. gotten to know them we have once a year, sometimes we'd have twice a year retreats for a while, and then we moved to once a year workshops, and just felt like it was a really good fit, and talked with the dean out there and the dean back here, and after my interim dean role, I handed in my chips and said, I'd like to do this. I asked Jay, and they approved it. They didn't pay for my move out there, but they approved the move, which was all we wanted at that point. So it was lovely to be a part of that community for a while. It felt for me like a really good fit for my own sort of theological self, even though that was just slowly developing at that point. And it stretched me. It was that kind of really stretching experience from a place where, yeah, this is the center of gravity is the same for me as these other folks. It was very, very male dominated. I remember about 30-ish people in our class, like our MDiv class, and all men except for myself and Beth Langstaff Full, who went on for her history PhD and had taught history for us for a bit as an adjunct until she passed away a few years ago. But we were the only two women. And I remember distinctly kind of those moments where that mattered, when we talked about women in ministry in the Pauline course with Tom Schreiner at the front of the class. And I remember the room I was in and the chair I was in. And I remember Beth was really far away back here. We didn't sit in the same spot. And I remember that mattering in that conversation. It was a hard conversation, even though I probably agreed with him on most points that he made. It just was a hard conversation because it felt like, for me, it was personal. For everybody else, it was not personal. And I've come to think quite differently about that. I think it's personal for all of us. But I remember that moment. And then we were both, whatever the people that walk in for graduation the year before, the honor guards or whatever they are. So we had the top grades. So the two women had the top grades. You had to wear the white things and walk in. It's kind of illuminating. I don't know. You just had to, it was hard to go to seminary as a woman in some ways. Even though I loved it and I thrived on it. I never got cornered by male students. Some of my colleagues did, some, who were more clearly moving into pastoral ministry, up against the wall, grilling them, whatever it was. But there were a lot of amazing men there as well. So, but there are a few that felt empowered to be inquisitors, I think, a little bit. As a student, I remember Jeanette was the one female faculty, on the faculty, on the full-time faculty. And when I came in 2000, Carla had preceded me. She was there. Denise Muir-Keysville came the same year I did. We shared an office for a while because she was from Sioux Falls and always commuted in. And that was really important to have those connections and that support. It was a large faculty and they were mostly men. And I was the only woman in my center. So we had the Center for Biblical and Theological Foundations, Center for Transformational Leadership, and Center for Personal and Spiritual Formation. Carla led that one eventually, not right away, the Formation Center. And Denise was in the Leadership Center. And I was in the Biblical and Theological Foundations Center. So I was with men, and we'd meet at least monthly, if not get together more as a center to do things and have conversations and decide curriculum and all that. So just working within a very male-dominated field and also within a very male-dominated part of Bethel, which my perception was that the seminary was the most sort of male-dominated of all of Bethel, and I think that's probably true. And with a large faculty, 30, and when we had Bethel Seminary, the East faculty as well, with like 25 to 30 faculty at our height, maybe even a little more than that, in the mid-2000s. And to have a small, contingent of women and navigating that. So that, as compared to today, we have a very small faculty at seminary and college, obviously, or undergrad as well. I haven't counted on my hand, but, a third to something of the faculty are women, but we have 10 of us. So 3, 4 of us, something like that. And I don't know what it was when I was a student. I don't know the numbers there, but our largest in terms of the student population, as far as I remember, was like 12 to 1,300 across 3 regions. And then when we started to, close schools, that was smaller, of course. But the numbers started to go down 2008 and beyond. And maybe a little before that. I don't think I was tracking it at that point, but 2008, and that's where kind of cuts in faculty and could argue which comes first, the cart or the horse, but yeah. So the just the makeup of the faculty. We've never had. We had a female Old Testament professor, so I'm thinking about in my discipline, Bible theology, history. For a while, Allison Lowe, and now Desan Hippie came a couple of years ago in theology. She was here for a 2-year appointment in 2002, 2003, potentially, and it's kind of that in that area. And I remember the fall workshop when she was no longer in that appointment, when she left Bethel. And I remember going to go upstairs to the dean's conference room to our first center meeting that we had within our fall workshop. And there were, there's 14 people up there. And I realized I would again be the only woman. And it was really a hard moment. I remember running into Don Mortensen, who our pastoral care prof. I'm like, Don, I can't go up there. I can't do it. I mean, I'm usually quite contained. I don't get terribly emotional. I was like, that's me. And I just couldn't do it, and I started to cry, and he pulled me over, and we had a little prayer huddle for a while until I had enough wherewithal to go upstairs and just deal with the fact that, once again, I was the only woman in that room. And for the foreseeable future, because we had hired 3 theologians, and Desan wasn't one of them, right? And that was really difficult. And part of my, as going in and out of sort of dean roles, part of my hesitation with ever becoming dean of Bethel Seminary was this sense that that role still felt like it was shaped like a man, and I would have to do a lot of work to kind of reconfigure that shape. People were anticipating it would be a man. Conversational or denominational partners would perceive that to be the case. I remember particularly in 2011 when I was considering that move and putting my hat in the ring for the dean position. And I remember, and because I was interim dean, I was at board meetings that year. I just remember having this sense, and it wasn't what anybody was saying, explicitly, but I had this sense that the dean they were looking for, because of the place the seminary was at that point financially and other ways, was a savior. And I just thought, we have a savior already. And that savior is shaped like, sort of knight on a white horse. I kind of had these little images that came up in my mind. And I thought, I don't think, for numbers of other reasons, I also didn't pursue that path. But that was a really important one. To say, I understand why people would want to have somebody who could really pull us out of this mess that we were in as an institution, and certainly as a seminary. And it just didn't feel like it was going to all be realistic. So I'm glad I didn't do that. Yeah, certainly expectations were there. And this would kind of match the wider sense of how women are expected to function in our society, and certainly in kind of business or institutional contexts where you're working. But I remember one, probably just early on, probably just maybe my 3rd year, maybe 2nd year, we get the committee assignments, and I have 9 committee assignments. I went to Leland and I said, Leland, do you know you assigned me to 9 committees, including 2 searches, which are really intensive? And he's like, he wanted representation, right? And we have a smaller number of women, and I also had a bent toward administration. I led the faculty development committee for a while, and we did lots of fun things, I thought, when I would do that. But he took my name off of some of those, but it just is that kind of sense of wanting representation, knowing I do a good job, and also, I don't know that women have quite, in that point in history, in this institution, maybe other institutions, women didn't have the sort of the luxury of being the curmudgeon that nobody wanted on a committee. Does that make sense? I'm not saying all of my male colleagues were curmudgeons. Very few of them were and are. I don't have any curmudgeons who are colleagues now. So, but this kind of sense of being able to throw some weight around and get off of things, I didn't know I had that. I didn't have permission to do that exactly. And of course, not nine. So that kind of thing, So different expectations. I have this vague, or I have this, kind of this sense of early on, because I was a student at the seminary too. So then I come as a young faculty, but not young. I defended my dissertation and I turned 40 in the same fall. I was not a young PhD student. And yet there's this sense of, and I look back, as I look back kind of in the teens, I could kind of identify it better, this infantilization that happens to women. I felt some of that. I mean, some of these people were my teachers, so that makes it a little more complicated. And, that can be raised at an opportune time to kind of, for advantage. It's just those kinds of things where I feel like to be taken seriously in some roles. I think by the time I was the interim dean, I think people knew I had those giftings and that was fine. But I just remember some early things that I was put in charge of. And I just felt like there was the end run around me. Now, it might have happened if I wasn't a woman as well, but you just wonder, right? Was that about gender or not? And I've come to the conclusion that when I have to ask that question, when the question pops up, I can usually say that was at least partly about gender. It's not usually always about gender, but there's part of it is who I am, who a person is, what the situation is, and then there's some of that gender mixed in that could easily go around me to the dean or to the provost, and if they didn't like a direction that I was moving a process or something like that. So I think those things are just harder to name, but they certainly were there. I remember when faculty devotions swapped out. So every other year or so you're doing a faculty devotion. Scariest thing you ever do in your life is a faculty devotion. And I remember basically all the topics I picked, but I did one year on sexism. But I did it by comparing. I have a really good colleague. He's Garwood Anderson, he's at Ashoda House, a New Testament scholar. And we found out for some reason that we were both doing the same book, we were doing a book review on the same book. It's Wesley Olmsted's Matthew 21 through 22 parables, And so we compared, we just shared it with each other. And his comment was so enlightening for the whole process of book reviews and maybe gender, maybe. He said, well, I think we have about the same assessment, but yours is so much nicer. And I thought, that's why I hate book reviews, because I have to say 3 nice things before I can say one critical thing. I mean, there's this whole, I feel like it's been set up by somebody that's not me to do these kinds of book reviews, and I have to try to do something different. And they take way too much work for the amount of time they're supposed to take. But I gave that example and then talked a little bit about, institutional, systemic kinds of realities related to gender. And I think it was light touch, I don't know. But that was probably when I was, associate professor, 7 years into my role. I decided it was great. So it feels like it's hard to name it all the time, because nobody ever just said to my face, "You don't belong here," because that's not the way hiring would happen at the seminary. You always have the question of, are you egalitarian or complementarian, and why? And the follow-up question always was, can you work with people who don't agree with you on this? Which was always a beautiful way of making sure our faculty was more diverse in that area, which represented all sorts of constituencies that we had students coming from, including our own Converge. And at the same time, making sure that it was a livable environment, right, for women, female students, women teaching, anyway. But I do think one of the changes is this sense of many more women, both in terms of student body and in terms of faculty and staff. And there's just this not this feeling of heavy male-centric experience. I mean, I think one, thinking broadly, is when Deb Harless became provost. Obviously, she was very influential before that, but that seems like a really important moment for the institution. I think that the tipping point at the seminary so even though we have egalitarians and complementarians, or we did, I'm just not sure we have any strong we don't have any strong complementary voices anymore. I'm not sure of everyone's position in the moment always, but I think we have all egalitarians. I don't know, maybe. But at some point, the tipping point of both the number of women on the faculty, but also the sense that the majority were egalitarian, I think felt to me like a important marker, without the seminary ever trying to have diversity in that area, and yet having a lot of interest in a strong kind of thoughtful hermeneutic about Scripture has probably pressed us into kind of hiring just people that tend to be or happen to be egalitarian, maybe. So the tipping point where it didn't feel like I was having conversations anymore with my husband that would end with him saying, if we need to go somewhere else, we can do that. If we need to go somewhere else where you don't have to do this, what perceived to be a battle at that little season of life, we will do that. So I think when that stopped happening, and I'm moving to San Diego, that kind of they're very much a community and of affirming of each other's gifts, and there was just a sense of that being a really good place for me as well. And I think St. Paul has become has become that as well. The woman who taught Greek in the 40s, is that right? I don't know much about her, but I've read about her, probably written by you. Yeah, right. So full tenure track. So my hiring was a turning point. And I remember when I was a student in probably 88, 89, they were looking for a woman and were having a hard time finding a woman to fit. I'm always sensitive about fit language because that can be used to screen out all sorts of things, and not just theological things. But I remember going to an interview, or to a class where a woman was teaching. She was brand new at a PhD, and she wasn't called further in the process. I don't know much more about it than that, but so I know they've been trying for over 10 years to hire. And so when they started to meet with me, I felt very good about the fact that I think the first woman to teach in my area or in theology, and I think theology was actually harder than biblical studies, to tell you the truth, would be an internal hire, would be somebody who had gone through, their known quantity, right? I do have a story, but anyway, so I think it just was a hard process for that to happen. And it didn't just necessarily pave the way for a bunch of other hires in my discipline, as you can tell, or in my area. I remember once a male colleague, it was sort of offhandedly, maybe I was there a couple of years, noting to me, it's really, affirming my presence on the faculty, and it's nice to have a woman who doesn't have a chip on her shoulder on the faculty. And I thought, how do you know what's underneath my shirt here? what I want? It's like, what does that mean? What does it look like? I've learned really hard to shave that off before I get to work in the morning, because just the whole comment made me cranky and I wanted to have a chip on my shoulder after that. But those kinds of offhand, it's like meant to be a compliment, but it ends up being this way of continuing to shape women to be a certain way, certain women that are welcome here. And I think that was part of the hiring piece, there were so many things you had to get right. I remember thinking, I cannot walk into class the first day with a pair of scruffy jeans and sweater like some of my colleagues might. I wore suits into class first day, whether it was a skirt and a coat, blouse thing underneath, or if it was pants and a coat and a suit thing. That's what I bought and that's what I wore, especially first day. And I just had to watch what I wore because that was important. I remember, a female colleague saying, I don't put up artwork of my children. I didn't put up artwork in my last job of my children because just don't, my male colleagues might be able to do that, but I can't. Sort of the narrower bandwidth for females and for people of color in our systems. They just had a smaller range of what was okay. We just had to stay within it. So the idea of fit is always, that's why you're looking for more things than this. You're looking for this, though you don't always know it. So search committee work has been interesting and also tricky to try to name some of that stuff. I think we have a lot of help nowadays from departments that are meant to help us with that. So that's really good. because of the pattern of the seminary, to always make sure that they were comfortable with women teaching at a seminary in whatever area. I mean, mine was kind of the first full-time hire in biblical studies, but because of that, I didn't experience that when I was a faculty member from faculty. I did have some students early on, especially before I got my PhD, when I couldn't use doctor. That helped a little bit, I think, even though I don't tend to use that title a lot, but I could use it if I needed to. Some students who just didn't know quite what to do with me. I've had that happen ever since 1990, 6, just especially male students. But I think, but just generally speaking, that a couple of different really interesting, one response by a student who and he said at the end of the term, he waited to the end of the term to write me an email and just say, I never had a female professor, period. I mean, maybe in undergrad as well. And, teaching Bible, now teaching Bible, and a little bit of it felt a little passive aggressive, some edges to it, but also trying to figure it out, like he's trying to figure it out. And my dean, David Clark, helped me navigate a conversation with him that was helpful, hopefully redemptive. But I also remember having early on when I was just starting my PhD and teaching as an adjunct, male students who were a little more disrespectful. I didn't have either, I was young at that point, or younger than them, and I didn't have a PhD, and I was, new to my field, and there was just a little bit of pushback in different kinds of ways, and then also a reaction of, I had a sense of looking at the wheels turning when they started to ask me what I was doing in my PhD work, and well, she can do it, I can do it. I had some of that kind of experience of men, not women. But then I had a woman who came up to me at the end of, maybe early in my teaching, a couple years in. She's like, this has been so amazing. I mean, just having you up there, it didn't matter if you said anything at all or taught me anything. I'm like, no. I mean, inside I'm like, no. It matters what I teach. But, of course I said, I'm so glad that's been helpful. But I became that kind of just a prototype of some kind, even beyond what I said, I guess. So I think people were trying to navigate that newness, and there were men and women both doing that. And I was, of course, trying to figure out how to do all this as well. I think there's a lot of similarities between what I've experienced in my guild and at Bethel. In terms of some of the implicit sexism and kind of narrow bandwidth of expectation. In my guild, when I go to Society of Biblical Literature meetings, I mean, it's just not a question of whether a woman can teach or, so but it's still, I think we're about 25% of our guild. So it's still a small enough number that you feel some of the difference. I think early on, I mean, I didn't meet with publishers because they were all men, and I didn't know how to get into that thing. I mean, Jim Kinney, I call him my publisher with Baker, because he came to visit me. He was the only one that came to visit me when they did the rounds, And he still gives me great advice for my projects and thinking about what next and all that stuff. But it was just this kind of sense of not in the right conversations, didn't know how to go about that. I felt some of that also at Bethel early on when there was a lot of men, and guys going out for lunch. And I had a few colleagues who asked me for lunch, like one-on-one. But some men probably wouldn't have asked me one-on-one for lunch. And that's fine. I don't know that I want to go to lunch with them anyway for lunch. But just kind of figuring out who those people were that were going to kind of treat me as fully as an equal and not a threat, and not even with some residual kind of Billy Graham principle thing going on. So, some of that kind of being in the right conversations in the right rooms, and I'm not going to be in the men's bathroom. So, those kinds of advantages in some sense of conversations that you're a part of. I think some of that, both Guild and Bethel, just some of the wondering, was that because I'm a woman? I get that, in both Guild and at Bethel more so in the past, not in the present. if you're asked, initially not being asked to do things or not being in the right circles for kind of writing projects, I just did journal stuff. I sent them out of journals and they're blind review and great. And but after a while, then I start to be asked, because I think, oh, you want to diversify your bibliography, right? Or you want to diversify your table of contents for this project. And, I can feel that some of that even now. I think I was asked for that, not because I'm good at that topic, because I'm a woman, it's close enough. Get some of those things. I think some of that also felt like opportunities at Bethel potentially as well. But, it's a double-edged sword, because sometimes I got to have opportunities I wouldn't have had if I were a man potentially. So, church-wise, because I grew up in a really conservative context, I mean, this is, those messages of should I be doing this lasted for, longer than even when I sort of was myself convinced I could teach, came into kind of an egalitarian position. It still just took a while to feel more comfortable there. So church context now, looking for the opportunity to learn under a female pastor at Mill City Church. And Steph she's been wonderful to go and learn from and enjoy her leadership. And that's been important to me for a number of years, given that I spent so many years with only male pastors. So that's about time I shifted that around. So yeah, I mean, comparisons there. I think the seminary at this stage is just a very tight-knit community. Peter's done a really great job of building that kind of, even over COVID. He came in, I think, in 19. And it just feels that there's a lot of support for one another, and not related to, gender. I mean, that's not withheld or given more so because of gender, but it's just a community of brothers and sisters that feels very, very strong to me. I'm a senior member, so I'm probably a lot more vocal in faculty meetings than some of my younger colleagues. I have to try to mitigate some of that, maybe. But it feels to me like a warm environment, so I'm hoping they all feel that. I hope. So I do need to mention Carla Dahl as a mentor, who, though from a very different disciplinary vantage point, was as well. She's a born leader. And she led at Bethel at many points, including Center Dean for Formation. But she also just had a way of building the community that we had. I mean, men and women, yes, but also when we get to we got a critical mass, so Denise and Carla and Lori Joss, registrar, and Mary Jensen and Mary Sanders and Kristen Anderson. And there was this kind of critical mass of women who would come to faculty meeting. And she would, at the end of the year, celebrate our wonderful women picnics. She would call it that. I mean, she would work hard so that there was never any tendency toward competition amongst women, because we're in a system that's male privileged. And then you can vie for power or whatever little bit you can, or hook on to this person. She was just like, we are, this is about friendship, affirmation, support. What do people need? She just was so good at doing that. Just had no place for competition amongst this little group of women. And I remember one year, we always dispersed in faculty meetings. So it's like, like a woman here, a woman there. It just was our natural tendency. So one year we just decided, I'll sit together. I mean, we're going to sit together if we want to, which we often did, right? So we started to cluster and group, and men would come in and go, they'd also be like, because they weren't used to it. We were so accommodating to the male gaze to say, we're not going to make them at all feel uncomfortable. And I remember once standing in the hallway, not related to faculty at all, standing in the hallway outside of where the provost comes out, and Leland came out one day, and by the way, I adore Leland, I just think he's fabulous, and he saw a group of like 6 or 7 women standing there, and he just went, and he made some sort of comment, and I'm sure he just afterwards kicked himself. But it was just a sense of, we clearly had so catered to not making men nervous about the presence of women, because that was the tradition we came from. If women are here and they want to be in power, right? They'll want to, I don't know what it was. But it was such a fun season of saying we're just going to gather together, like the book, why do all the African American children sit together in the cafeteria? I know the title's not quite like that, but that kind of experience is what we were experiencing. The sense of, no, we can gather, and that became really kind of like part of our DNA, and that was really important, especially at a time when we had maybe 30 faculty, and we still had a small group of women in that. Coherence, cohesiveness, friendship, and they have lasted through the years. I mean, these are people I adore to this day, and we gather to support each other when people are going through something bad or good, or it's just been a really important part of it all. Well, I just would love Bethel University to thrive. I really would. And as part of that, the seminary. But together, to be a place where I think where Jesus the Messiah is central, and where we can figure out how to navigate difference, but affirm men and women as very much in the image of God. Yeah, I've been here long enough where I feel joined to its mission and, joined to its future, even as I think about retirement. I still want to see Bethel thriving and men and women really good things.